Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Got my cup of coffee and a few minutes to spend with you as we continue to talk about Matthew's account of the life and ministry of Jesus. We're in the last chapter of Matthew. This is kind of the key if we think about who we are as followers of Jesus. What happens in this chapter, in this 27 and 28? Everything hinges upon it. And we started last week with our friends Mary Magdalene and the other Mary who were at the tomb watching Jesus be buried, and then came back the first day of the week, that Sunday morning. We call it Easter Sunday morning, to that same tomb. And Matthew goes on and records some remarkable things that happened. In fact, this is what he said. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. And then listen to this. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. It's a fascinating picture. At the end of chapter 27, we didn't really cover this, that the chief priests go to the Romans and say, go to Pilate that condemn Jesus and say, listen, we're worried that Jesus' disciples are going to try to steal his body and claim something miraculous happened. So set a guard. And Pilate agrees to set a guard before the tomb, to take the guard and make sure nothing can happen. And so that's what's happening here in chapter 28. These guards are there. They've been there since Jesus has been buried. And on the first day of the week, an angel comes down. Now, these are Roman guards. These are hardened soldiers. They have seen some things. And they weren't used to being intimidated. They were used to being the intimidators. But when this angel of the Lord comes down and the earthquake hits, they are reduced to puddles. They're shaking, and they're just helplessly sitting by. They don't know what to do. They're paralyzed with fear. It's just a remarkable picture. And the stone is rolled away. And these women have come to this tomb that they were just there a few days ago. They know where it is. They've seen it. They watched Jesus be put inside by Joseph. Now they come back because it's just consumed their thoughts for these few days that they went about their business, and now they're back, and this is what they see. The stone is rolled away. The angel on top of the stone. Soldiers shaking like leaves, paralyzed on the ground. And what does the angel say to them? What an angel always seems to say when an angel shows up. Do not be afraid. That's what the angel said to the women. Do not be afraid. Now, someone said, I don't know if this is true, and I should have looked it up, and I'll do that sometime. But supposedly there are like 365 do not be afraids in the Bible, often on the lips of angels. Again, haven't confirmed that. I read it on the internet, so it must be true, I guess. I don't know if it's true or not. Haven't done the research, done the search. But if it's true, it would make a lot of sense. Because, certainly in this situation, do not be afraid seems like the appropriate response, because the soldiers are petrified with fear. These women would certainly be considered more helpless than hardened Roman soldiers. How are they going to react to this? They come out of grief, out of sadness to the tomb where Jesus had been laid, and they're greeted by a stone rolled away. The soldiers and the angel. I don't know about you, but I would be a little worried. I would be a lot scared. And the angel says, do not be afraid. But he doesn't just say that. He says, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. Well, of course that's who they're looking for. They came back to the tomb because they had watched Jesus be buried, and something about who he was to them and what their interactions had been and how much he meant to them brought them back to the tomb. The first opportunity they could go back to the tomb. And of course they're looking for Jesus. But notice he says, he is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. And so he invites the women to look into the tomb, to see where Jesus should have been, where Jesus was buried, where they watched him buried. And he's no longer there. He is not here. He has risen. And then there's that wonderful phrase, just as he said. As we've gone through Matthew, you may remember several times that it's recorded, beginning in Matthew 16, that Jesus tells his disciples, listen, this is what's going to happen. We're going to go to Jerusalem. There are going to be people against me. They're going to arrest me. I'm going to die, but I'll rise again on the third day. He's kind of warned them about this several times from Matthew 16. That's right after Peter's great confession. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, on up till closer to their entry into Jerusalem. He has told them, and they every time their reaction, well, I shouldn't say every time it's the same, but their reaction is certainly not, whoa, this is remarkable, tell us more. It's kind of, it doesn't sink in. And here, I think that's why the angel says, just as he said. He wants us to remember those places, and he wants the disciples to remember. He wants these women to remember that Jesus didn't do anything he didn't tell them he was going to do. This was his plan. This was his purpose, to go to Jerusalem, to die, and to rise again. And he's done exactly what he said he was going to do. Now, there's a whole sermon in there. Does Jesus do what he says he's going to do? Absolutely. And we should trust him and take him at his word. But in here, it's really important, because this particular just as he said is the crux of the entire message of the Church of Jesus Christ. It is the thing. I said last week, I'm going to say it again this week. Our faith as Christians is based on an event in history, and in this case, with eyewitnesses to that event. There's more in this story. We'll look at it in the weeks ahead. There's more to what happens. There's more people that see Jesus, though he was dead, now resurrected. And Paul over in 1 Corinthians 15, it's a beautiful chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, that talks about the importance of resurrection, the resurrection of Christ. And one of the verses, I may have also mentioned it last week, if Christ is not raised, then our faith is in vain. Our faith is empty and worthless. But because of this event in history, the resurrection of Christ, our faith isn't in vain. In fact, when Paul says this is the gospel at the beginning of 1 Corinthians 15, he tells us Christ died for our sin according to the Scriptures. He was buried, and on the third day rose again according to the Scriptures, and appeared to many witnesses, up to several hundred at one time. Paul lays out the gospel that he preached, the gospel, the good news that the early Christians believed, the message that transformed his followers from hiding and afraid for their lives to boldly proclaiming, this Jesus whom you crucified, God has made him both Lord and Christ. The resurrection is the key event that all of history, and certainly all of the Christian faith, hinges on. And these women are the first witnesses to that. That's a remarkable thing, that we have this account. And that, again, a reminder how important that the writers of the New Testament wrote not what we might say would be, hey, let's write a story to make it the most believable. Because if they were trying to write the story to make it the most believable, the first witnesses to the resurrection would not be women, because their testimony didn't even hold up in court. But they wrote this story to say, hey, we're going to write what actually happened, even if in the taboos or the customs of society it doesn't make sense. And it's little details like that, and there are a bunch of them, not just in Matthew's gospel, but in Luke's and other accounts that lend credibility to this story, which is why when we talk about the resurrection being the cornerstone of our faith, we base it on eyewitness accounts. You know, the Bible, we often say the Bible tells us this, but the Bible is a collection of individual writings. And in this case, what we call the New Testament of the Bible starts with 4 individual writings: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 2 of them, Matthew and John, disciples of Jesus. Mark and Luke connected. John Mark in the Gospel of Acts connected to Peter, and Luke, a doctor who researched everything thoroughly, he tells us, and connected to Paul the Apostle. People that wrote accounts trying to lay out, this is what happened, and it made all the difference. And we want as many people to know what actually happened with Jesus that did. The Bible is made up of these kind of eyewitness accounts with witnesses like Matthew 28 verses 1 through 7 about what actually happened. And our faith as Christians is based on what actually happened, namely that Jesus was crucified, died, buried, and rose again. This is the good news of the gospel. This is the message of hope that comes to these women. The do not be afraid that starts this introduction to the women of the resurrection of Jesus are words of great hope. They came to the tomb thinking all hope was lost, and they left that tomb knowing hope was alive and Jesus was alive. And they and the disciples and others throughout history have passed that news along, one person to another. And that's why I'm here today. That's why I'm a believer in Jesus today. That's why I stand up every Sunday when we get together and open this book and talk about who Jesus is, what he has said, and what it means to us 2,000 years later that he lived, he died, he rose again. I hope you know the hope that is available in Jesus. And as always, we invite you, if you want to learn more, if you want to know more, come be a part of us. Sundays at 9, I just mentioned that. We gather here. We're talking about this season of the year, the Thanksgiving season. We're talking about gratitude and how foundational that is to our life, and how it's a great barometer of our spiritual health. Is the more grateful and thankful we are, the healthier we are spiritually, and the less grateful and thankful we are, maybe that's a sign something's not exactly right in our spiritual life. That's what we're talking about on Sundays. Love to have you join us, and the biggest thing we can be grateful for is what God has done for us through Jesus Christ. So it's always a privilege to spend a few minutes with you talking about him, talking about Jesus, talking about what made all the difference to me. And I'd love to do it some more. Maybe it's next Wednesday, maybe it's on Sunday. Either way, have a great week, and we'll connect soon.